Hi, this is Geoff Berry, and welcome to the Nature Calling channel, where we aim to deepen connection to the earth and to the spirit of life and to all our kin on this beautiful planet.
All right. Thanks so much for joining me, Tawney Bevilacqua.
Thank you for having me, Geoff Berry.
You have just completed doing some placement hours with me as part of your degree. Do you want to tell people just a little bit about where you were coming from when you came into ecotherapy training?
Mm. So I'm at the end of my Bachelor of Psychotherapy, Counseling and Psychotherapy. So I did basically all my training so far has just been in like grounded in phenomenology, philosophy, and then I've done a tiny bit of ecotherapy study with you through my uni, and now my first placement has been in ecotherapy.
So you have done prac skills as well during the degree as well.
Yeah, a lot of counseling practice, which
Right.
is more kind of person centered. And it's an integrative psychotherapy course, so learning different models of psychotherapy, but nothing eco based specifically. Like, I think a lot of the models touch on holistic experiences of self and how we place ourselves within environments, but
Mhm.
not until ecotherapy did I feel like it completely named non-human aspects of self as integral.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. So the reason I wanted to record a conversation with you at the end of your experience was because you reported taking your clients to a botanical gardens. And I know that a lot of people who might be interested in taking their counseling or psychology or psychotherapy practice out into nature often have a trepidation. And as you just said, because most training is about being in a clinical room, so what's going to happen if I'm trying to reproduce that outdoors?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, part of ecotherapy is bringing nature into the clinic room too, but I was specifically interested in your experiences. So can you tell listeners and viewers where you took your clients to begin this exploration of the difference between counseling indoors and outdoors?
Mm-hmm. So specifically, I was working in Castlemaine Botanical Gardens. So that's a small town,
Right.
um,
Central
and
Victoria, for people who don't
Central
know.
Victoria. Yes, exactly. Um, yeah, and for 11 weeks, we were meeting weekly in the same place, which was just outside the gates of the Botanical Gardens.
Okay. Oh, that's an interesting. You had the threshold set up. You met outside the gate. Now we are beginning through the gates.
Exactly,
Right.
yeah,
Good
some kind
enough.
of formal way of entering together.
That's a great start.
Yeah.
Can
Do you
you
want
can
to
you
know, or what were you going to say?
well, I just wanted to know, can you give us a feel for what we're looking at here? So we're at gates outdoors, going into botanical gardens, pretty well
Mm,
manicured natural space.
yeah, so the gardens, they're quite big, really. Like, it's the whole plot of land is like one big rectangle. It's flat ground, and then all around there's old buildings from the gold field. I mean, the gold mining era. So
Yeah.
just like feels pretty rustic. And
Right.
then the actual gardens, there's a lake in the center and old trees
Right.
and a big loop around the lake and a big playground and a barbecue area and many different spaces, like a,
Great.
a few sections where the the flowers were being kind of replanted over time. And
So this is a working space. This isn't just a public space. You've got. Did you have many people? You're going in for a session on average. Around about how many people do you think you might see, public or workers?
I would say about 40.
Okay, all right, okay. More than I thought. I reckon one of the things people are going to want to know pretty quickly off the bat is how close did they come or
Mm.
approach? Were you walking, sitting?
Mm.
How did that go?
When we were having sessions where we're walking, that's when we would see a lot of people. So we would just cross paths with people. And depending on where we were at in conversation, we would just keep talking a lot of the time. But if it was a really vulnerable moment, there would just be some kind of natural pause in what we're saying, and someone would pass, and then we would continue. I guess there was, because it's a small town, there was a little bit of complexity because people know each other. So my clients would see just neighbors or kind of acquaintances or friends. And generally, it just worked out that my client would wave and the other person would wave, and then we would keep walking. There were only maybe 2 or 3 times where the other person stopped and had a chat with my client, but then that became part of the session, and it just became another piece of information that happened between us.
Right? Didn't really break it up too much.
No, because what I noticed was that if there was a real deepening into the session, often we would kind of move away from the track and be more in an intimate spot together.
Yeah.
So the walking generally felt like that was something that happened when there was a lightness to what was going on. And then based on what was happening between us, then we would move in the space differently.
Right. Okay, great. Yeah, so you're adapting as you go, which is
Yeah.
something that's important to humans and to all living beings in terms of their relationship with their environment. The other
Mm.
thing I found intriguing in there was, as you said, sometimes you'd be walking and okay, might be a vulnerable moment, might be talking about something pretty sensitive. You both stop, and as you know, as I know from your course, being comfortable in silence is such a great skill. So in a way, that pause is almost helpful, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Speak for even if it's just 20 seconds. Someone else walks past, pick it back up. It's settled in a little. There's another reflection that's emerging. Awesome. So,
Yes.
so I can see that other people approaching or you walking past other people creating little bits of silence can actually be generative and not a problem. And then, as you said, you can also adapt by moving where you are and where you're going, which is something I got comfortable with when I began exploring ecotherapy practices in Flagstaff Gardens, which was CBD Melbourne. It's
Mm.
just the natural feeling, almost like atoms of negative and positive that sort of move away from each other without, any direction. Okay, great. So,
Mm.
so that's you moving around the space. I think you reported sometimes you didn't always walk around.
Exactly.
How
Yeah.
else did you use the space?
So sometimes, if a client was feeling tired, they would say, I just want to sit. And we would go somewhere. Like they would find the place that they wanted to sit. And that was often under a tree. Or there was one particular time where me and my client sat under this sheltered, it was kind of like a pergola that had vines growing over the whole thing. So
Ah,
it really felt like a little cave, and no one came in. That felt like a clinic room. um,
actually, we were talking about that just offline, and you mentioned that, and it brought to mind, as I think it did for you too, that example from Martin Jordan, where
mm,
he
yeah.
actually built a dome of willow in his yard at that
Yes.
therapy space. It's like he found a wild. I kind of like. It's almost that romantic idea of the overgrown vines or an old structure.
Yeah, it was very romantic. And then also that space changed so much over the course of the 11 weeks.
Right.
Those vines, because when I first started, it was just coming out of winter and entering into spring. And that was not as, it wasn't as lively, but gradually over the course of the sessions, that space really flourished.
As the spring growth came to the vines. And of course, when we're talking, a romantic space here, we're not talking about romantic liaisons. It's more the feeling, like the atmosphere of
Mm,
something in nature that sort of draws you out, which I didn't realize.
mm,
It was spring, right? So that's exactly the time we start to come out of our natural sort of winter hibernation
mm.
in.
Yes,
Okay,
such a
so time
time.
of year is spring, basically all the way through spring. There's the
Yeah,
3 months coming out of winter.
yeah, exactly. Such a
Okay.
turning point.
Did your clients see that? Did that come up? Did that feeling of the joie de vivre of spring,
Mm,
just the joy and the pleasure of coming back out into nature,
mm.
come up at all?
That did come up, particularly with one client. Um, yeah, she was really wanting to walk bare feet, although she couldn't for health reasons. But
Uh,
just she was feeling like when we would see the baby ducklings, and when there was also, I forgot to mention, a fountain in the gardens that was kind of the ritual closing for one client and I. We would always go there at the end. Um,
how
and
come? What's the connection between the fountain and a ritual closing? Or did you make the connection? Did it just happen organically?
it was organic. We were just going to that fountain every time to close, and then we started to ritualize it as a particular. We would walk around it in a particular direction, do one little loop, and that was the end. That's when we would know together that we were done.
So that was quite concrete. You'd agreed on this. Let's do our ritual closing at the fountain.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, a threshold crossing again, I suppose.
Yeah, that's right. We have to go back to the real world and integrate what we've learned to why we're doing it to
Yeah.
grow and adapt. Okay, great. What else comes to mind? Your experience. So other people around wasn't really a problem. And you said like there were workers too coming out replanting and things like that.
Yeah,
They'd be
exactly.
trained to leave you alone, to leave the public alone anyway.
Yeah, and I think the park is a space where there's probably what I've taken from it is that people can be so open there because it's often just very life giving to be around beautiful gardens that are taken care of. But then at the same time, it feels like there's enough introspection happening at the gardens as well to accommodate that.
Yes.
Um, and what comes to mind is that one of my clients spoke to the fact that they, throughout their life, have had a really intense connection to the natural world to the point where it's overwhelmed them sometimes, and that they are gradually trying to have that be a part of their life again. So coming into a space that is actually contained made them feel safe, like it was an entry point back into the wild. Because going to, a, I don't know, a place that is not fenced or not bound by anything felt to them like they just had no idea what would come up and how much they might be stretched or transcended by that. So I think that's a benefit of the garden, is like it's you can touch the wild, but it won't overwhelm as well.
Yeah, it's got that natural boundary.
Yeah.
Oh, Sarah really wants to be part of this, doesn't it?
I know. They're having a time out here.
Oh, you've got a murder of crows, I think.
Yeah. I love that they're called that.
Isn't it great? Okay, I love this. And now you talked about, so we've had had the previous structure of the kind of overgrown, almost cave-like little building.
Mm.
We've got the structure of the bounded space with
Mm.
wilderness within it, or at least with, nature. And the fact that, as you said, it's cultivated nature. I like that. It feels nice. It's a garden. Someone cares for this space.
Mm.
As we know now, we've learnt so much over recent times about how Aboriginal Australians took care of country, as they call it, that it was effectively gardened just on a big macro scale of time and space, that it was
Mm.
nurtured land and country as well. But this is more apparent to your everyday client. They don't need to be educated into Aboriginal care for country to know that a garden is cared for, but it's also nature. So you have that on your side. The other thing I
Mm.
wanted to ask, because you sort of alluded to it, so that structure, that safety, the two things I always look for when I'm looking for a space to work in, most particularly in things like retreat centers where we do the training, where we have to, we're really opening a lot of the time. We're working on ecotherapy all day, every day. It needs a lot of
Mm.
holding that kind of space. It's
Mm.
the balance between things like open spaces and closed spaces, safe spaces and places that allow you to feel like you can get things out. I like to
Mm.
have some cleared land,
Mm.
whether it be paddocks or just hillsides without trees, so that people get that feeling of space. Did you have some varieties of space in these gardens? And did you know people did tend to go to different things or issues or feelings around different types of spaces?
There was variety in the sense that, um, say, for example, at the back of the gardens, there were big pine trees. And then there was a section where it's more like oak trees, and that creates a whole different atmosphere. And then there was also a really small creek that runs on the other side of the gardens. And yeah, there is a nice ratio of openness to closed options as well. The one thing that came to mind as you asked that, though, was this particular moment where I was with a client and she was saying this space, which was like an overgrown kind of canopy area, she said, this kind of feels like my mind. And we wanted to explore that, but it was a walkway. And there was just too much traffic for us to kind of stay there and really explore that idea.
Huh.
So that is one thing about the park that maybe, yeah, the adaptability is really such a factor in the sessions. Like, because there's so many humans around, even if there is the option to move and to adapt that way, it's like the exact thing that opens up the discussion might not be the thing that gets to be explored, and it
Yeah.
has to be moved to a different spot.
Did you manage to unpack that idea by moving to a different spot and reflecting on it, or was it gone?
I didn't manage. I think I've learned from that I could have done that better. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries.
Mm.
And who knows if she hasn't returned to it as well. Like, the opening was made there and then.
Mm. Yeah.
I have to ask because you mentioned it though. This is going to be tough. I'm so sorry. On the spot, Tawny.
Okay.
You said there's a different atmosphere between the oak grove and the
Mm.
pine trees. Can you put a name to that at all?
Pardon? What was the
Can
last
you put a name to that? Can you put any words to that? How would
Mm.
you evoke the atmosphere of an oak grove versus a patch of pine trees?
The pine trees to me felt like this kind of sparse, dry, but really solid patch of the park, and orderly, because I think that they were planted there in a row a long time ago. So they,
Classic plantation line of
yeah, yeah, that part felt to me like, and it was also the first end of the park. So you're kind of halfway through a lap of the park by that point. So it's normally, actually, that was another thing. One loop of the park was roughly an hour if we were walking at the same
oh,
pace. So
whoa,
that
that's
was like,
like perfect session, huh?
yeah, like a natural timekeeper was
Great.
the space. So that would be like the halfway point. And maybe I'm just associating that space with that point in the session because it's kind of tied together for me now. But it was always a place of like structure or something. And then the oak area felt to me more, the shapes are a bit less predictable and the shade is a bit more dappled, and uh, and there was something lighter. Even the lighter green color felt like less heavy. So, and also that was after the halfway point. We're kind of on the way back by then.
Maybe you've done the heavy lifting of the session.
Yeah. Except for if we went the other way around on the
Indeed.
track, and sometimes that happened. If the
Oh, you
client,
did that as well?
yeah, sometimes they go the other direction.
I wonder if that was intuitive too, when you felt how it was going to go with the client or what they might have wanted to go to. Do you let them lead? Do you even know who's picking the direction at the start?
I let them lead.
You do?
Yeah, yeah. Except for if there was, um, if we were running out of time, then I would have to redirect us back.
Yeah, sure.
But generally,
And is that mostly walking side by side, Tony?
yes, walking side by side. Yeah.
How about sitting under a tree? How do you do that? Do you sit facing them or do you still sit side by side or looking out?
I generally found myself sitting next to them, like both of us having our back on a tree.
Okay.
Generally, a
Maybe.
big tree.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was another time where my client and I were both laying on our backs under the tree and looking up, and that was
Nice.
side by side.
Bringing in the sky, the clouds, how did that change? Or where were you at in a session for that moment?
We were looking up at a really big tree, so there was a little bit of sky, but mostly we were seeing
Ah,
the branches and a bird up above, and that was a time where they needed anchoring. So that was the anchor they chose, was to be with the roots of the tree.
lying on the ground on the roots. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even though they're looking up, they're really feeling. Did you get into that? You said you've got a lot of your training with phenomenological. Did
Yeah.
you get into that somatic experiencing, like felt sense in the body? I mean, it sounds like you did at that point. Is that something that you chose to do during sessions? Really, let's feel how we are on the ground when people need grounding, stuff like that.
I think that is something that I aspire to do more of. I did do a little bit of um, inquiry into kind of where the client was experiencing particular things in their body as they're expressing something. But I noticed that I'm not as confident in that space. And I think that is an area that I want to focus on more of, because it makes sense when, particularly being outside in the park, it is such a sensorial experience, sensual experience. So we're feeling the sun on our skin, or like we're both sharing in the sounds that are moving around us. So when we would get into conversation, I noticed that sometimes I was just starting to focus on them and not taking in as much of what was happening around. And I had to kind of try to temper that and try to hold the wider picture and also their bodily experience and bring that in too. So there's so many layers, and I think it's just shown me a lot of what I need to learn as well.
Right. Okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, we're always evolving, but
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the themes that you've brought up there, or maybe even issues, is aside from the fact that nature's all around us, what actually makes the difference between a talking session and a session that's in ecotherapy, like ecotherapy and talk therapy, apart from not being in a clinic,
Mm.
it is what is there, like you said, feeling the sun in that moment or lying down on your back on the ground so you can feel grounded. Like, what
Mm.
is the reason for us approaching this theme or unpacking this tension or conflict or issue at this place at this time?
Mm.
That's something that I think it is it's both foundational and subtle and sophisticated. I just think it's something you're always working with.
Yeah.
If you bring it in a clumsy way, you can't break the sense being together between the two of you, but you want to allude to it, right? Where you are, do we need
Mm.
to feel more grounded or do we need to open out? Something you don't want to push, but you do want to have at your disposal or become more aware of as you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I wonder as well how much, uh, if I am having a particular moment where I'm very in flow with the natural world, and that is very a part of my perceptual awareness, how much that can naturally transmit to a client. And then, for example, other periods where I'm feeling like I'm not as connected to what's around me, would that just be a time where I have to be more consciously trying to hold all of it and bring in elements that are not necessarily even part of my awareness at that time? Does that make sense?
It does, but I guess the lead for me is, as you said earlier, that you let the client lead in the simple sense of which way you're going to walk, or indeed whether you're going to walk or sit under a tree. But I
Mm.
suppose for me, because that sort of stuff, it's pretty hard to be working with somebody and to be aware of yourself and then to choose whether you're going to go with how you are, I'm in flow, or I'm feeling very thoughtful, internalized, and reflective. How much am I going to let that be part of the session because I need to be congruent here? Or how much am I going to maybe say, okay, I need to just bracket off? I mean, I need to compartmentalize my feelings or predispositions right now and just see where the clients are. Who knows? They might be feeling quite exuberant and lift you out of your thoughtfulness, or they might really need to
Mm.
go somewhere that seems like a downward spiral into strong feelings that you might need to go with them. It sounds like you're very adept at being able to go where the client needs to go.
Mm.
So that's important, I think, to keep a balance there of your own congruence, and you need to be there for the client, right? Because that's what you're practicing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Practicing in nature means, yeah, how much do you open out to the world in any given time? Because I have seen examples where we've been doing training where people have done it too much, been too clunky, and tried to force nature into the conversation when, the client's been reflected back that they didn't actually want that at that particular time. They really just wanted to unpack the issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose that it seems the main central part is attunement to the client, and then we can attune to the environment through our client as well.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else about the space? I mean, that's where we started. We've gone a few other places, which has been excellent because they're all related. Anything else you wanted to add about your experiences with working with clients in a
In the garden.
enclosed space of nature like?